welcome to Around the Square with me, Charlie Brown, a podcast where in the time it takes to walk around Northampton Square, we hear all about the art and craft of podcasting from one of the students here at City University. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Oli Mansfield. Good to see you, Oli.
Hello,
Thank you for coming.
On.
We have got our drinks from Danny's Cafe, where we begin our journey as always. So let's get walking and talking. Tell us about yourself, Oli, and most importantly, about your podcast.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, my name's Oli Mansfield, and I run the Under One Sky podcast, which is interesting because it looks to break down misconceptions and stereotypes surrounding homelessness, which I embarked on with the charity Under One Sky, which does operate in London, and I absolutely loved it. So that was actually the podcast that kind of gave me the confidence to join the course and to pursue journalism and broadcasting more generally as a career. Hope it does go somewhere. And I loved it because the podcast enabled me to speak to people. It showed that actually that broadcasting, talking to people actually had power, that it could change narratives. And the podcast itself was focused on trying to stop people, it's tried to enable people to avoid careless speculation and to just jump to the conclusions about the homelessness that they see on the streets in London. I was in Durham at the time, that kind of informed my view of homelessness, and I was helping with the charity there. And we had lots of different guests. We had, the point was to get guests with different experience and different expertise, and each guest would explain and unpack one aspect of homelessness. So one of them was about substance use. That was the big takeaway of that podcast, that episode. Another one was about trauma and how that led to the streets. Another one was just dedicated to how Under One Sky as an organisation was set up, and the mantra behind it and the values undergirding the organisation. And so I was hoping to kind of attack the issue of homelessness from lots of different angles to allow people to understand it's actually not this simple idea of people kind of make one mistake and they're on the streets, but actually it's this whole cycle in life that actually all the right things in lives have gone wrong, and was hoping to show people that actually it's not simplistic, it's not just one-time thing, it's actually this line within their lives actually, that it wasn't simple, because actually there was lots of things that kind of compounded each other that led to this one moment that you see. You only see a snapshot, you only see maybe someone sitting in a doorway or on a bench or on the street, and you think, oh, that's it, and dilute it all down to that one snapshot. But actually there's so much behind the issue of homelessness that led to that moment.
Yeah, and it's a hugely important subject, obviously, and one that needs a lot of sensitivity, and clearly amazing stuff that you've achieved with it. What would be your, so far, what's your proudest achievement of all of that?
I think I went into the podcast as hoping to be the voice of the listener, and so actually my views myself changed when I listened to the guests I was interviewing. My proudest moment would probably be hearing other people I spoke to and hearing that actually their views were slowly changing and their views were slowly becoming a bit more nuanced. Not in a pretentious way and kind of like prideful way in terms of being a bit different, but actually the views that people had, the change in the views people had meant they engaged with people on the street differently. Listening to the guests meant that I engaged with people differently. And that was the biggest hope for the podcast, that actually wouldn't just be something people listen to on their commute and kind of put it to bed after that, but actually they would listen and they would actually act upon hearing something different, hearing the reality.
Hugely important, and really speaks to the power of podcasting, and hopefully encourages anyone out there to do the same. And we always, as we approach the end of our journey, we always like to end on a piece of advice or tip that you might give to someone listening who's thinking about doing a podcast, perhaps a similar one or any sort of podcast.
I think I mentioned it already actually, is that podcasting is, as a host, you're not the main event. If you're wanting to set up a podcast or be a podcaster, depending on the type of podcast, if it's a comedy podcast, it's different. But if you're attacking an issue or trying to understand something a bit more nuanced, then you're not the expert. And so I found actually asking the simple questions and trying to be the ears of the listener as well as the voice was really helpful, because that enabled the conversations to be more rich and be more accessible.
Yeah, and that's great advice. The again, it speaks to the beauty of podcasts, that accessibility and the intimacy that it can bring to listeners is a wonderful thing. And we end perfectly on that note as we approach Danny's Caf at the end of our journey. But it's been really great to hear all about that. And of course, we urge everyone listening to this to subscribe to Oli's podcast, the details of which will all be in the show notes on our website, Word on the Square, where you'll also find details about this podcast, Around the Square. So it's good to see you, Oli. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Until next time, see you around the square.